Welcome to the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you level up your instruction in order to craft authentic learning experiences for both you and your students. I'm your host, Lee Tucker, a high school English teacher and ed tech enthusiast, and I want to join you on your journey to becoming the best instructor that you possibly can. So if you're ready, grab your adventuring gear and let's get going. What's up, 8-Bit crew? Today is Thursday, January 28th, and this is episode 25 of the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast. On today's show, I've got some nerdiness for you later on in the boss battle. We're going to take a look at the game Super Mario Maker and some of the lessons that I've taken from that and applied into the classroom. Before we get to that, though, I've got some news and updates, and then we'll pop open the treasure chest and get a little special surprise in there, a little audio in there today. I hope all of you are doing well and making it through second semester. We are almost all the way through January, which means we just have a few months left until the end and summer break, and that is right there on the horizon. So if you're having a hard time right now, stay strong, hang in there. Reach out and find some folks that can give you some encouragement to help us through these difficult times, because this year has definitely been trying. So hopefully you're staying strong and hanging in there. So for some news and updates, there's some Microsoft updates with Microsoft Edge web browser. The first is they are adding in a sleeping tabs feature. It frees up some computer memory. Any of you who, let's be honest, if you use any kind of browser, you know how tabs can really slow your computer down. When I'm on my Google Chrome at work, I easily have 15 to 20 tabs open, if not more, and every single one of those tabs can eat up the computer's memory. So Microsoft Edge will start using a sleeping tabs feature that will kind of suspend the tabs, so that will free up some of that memory and the computer won't run as slow. So if you are an Edge user, be looking forward to that. Also, they're adding in a picture dictionary and translate feature into the immersive reader for Microsoft Edge. Microsoft Bing search will now start to have some knowledge cards for some of those commonly researched topics that students have, to give some quick, easy consumption of some useful information. Also, they're going to have a new web capture feature that allows you to use like a digital pen or your finger on a touch screen, or on just a regular computer, you can use your mouse in order to draw on captured content in the browser. So it's kind of like an annotation software that would allow you to annotate websites and web pages and all that. And then finally, Microsoft Proctorio is now going to be an Edge add-on feature. Some of you, if you are Microsoft users, may use Proctorio. It's a testing system that helps allow for some secure testing online. So those of you who might be teaching virtual still could use Proctorio as an add-on, just to make it a little bit easier, a little bit more secure for giving some of those tests. In some Google updates, a couple of Google Workspace updates. One is a short little Gmail integration update, which is the Google Chat and Rooms side panel in the Gmail sidebar. So if you use that, on the left-hand side panel, you can have your Google Chat conversations, and you can pull them up easy. They're now going to have a feature where you can adjust that, so you can make that space a little bit bigger to be able to more easily see the different conversations that you have going on. And then a Google Sheets update. They're adding in a new feature called Range Name Box. Basically what it is, it's a way to navigate to specific active cells and ranges in a Google Sheet. If you are someone who is constantly kind of clicking, dragging to highlight certain cells a lot, this is something that could save you some time. And what it is, when you click and highlight a group of cells, there's a pull down menu now on the left hand side right next to where the formulas are, and you can choose choose the option to name that range. And then what you can do later on is if you need to select that whole range again, you can just go over to the named ranges sidebar and you can click on that and it will automatically highlight that whole column or selection, whatever you have. So a little bit easier way to get a hold of that. There's a GIF in the show notes on 8bitinstructor.com that will kind of show you a little bit of what that looks like. So that takes care of news and updates for this week. So up next, we're going to pop open the treasure chest.
I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
Oh man, talk about a great line from a great movie. I love the Lord of the Rings movies, and I think maybe aside from Bilbo's whole, I feel like butter scraped over too much bread, I think this is one of my favorite exchanges in the whole series. And so this has kind of popped up in my head a lot over the last few weeks because I think that this is what we are living. None of us asked to be in this situation, and just about every educator I've talked to has talked about how difficult this year has been, whether it's a first-year teacher or a 20, 30-year veteran. It's just like every week brings on a new challenge. And I think at this point in the year, a lot of us are just at this same kind of point that Frodo is. I wish this had just never happened. I wish this had never come to us, that this had never been the circumstances. And it's true. But the reality is that this is the situation that we're in. This is the hand that we've been dealt. And even if it's the worst hand that you could get in Texas Hold'em, we still got to play with it, right? So it's really just like Gandalf says. We don't get to decide the circumstances that we're living in. All we can do is decide what to do with the time that we do have. And so I would just encourage you this week to try to make the best of the situation that we're having. This week, we entered hybrid learning, at least for a couple of weeks. And I think that this is maybe the third or fourth or fifth different change that we've had in scheduling this year. And it feels like every time we get some kind of momentum, the rug is pulled out from under us. But again, I can't control the scheduling. I can't control what happens. What I can control is what I do when I walk into my class with whatever students are in there. And frustrating as it might be, as stressful as it might be, as annoying as it might be to have all these constant changes, let's remember why we're there, what we're doing, and let's just do our best with what we do have. So hopefully if you're struggling, having a difficult time, that can give you a little bit of encouragement. So that does it for this week's treasure chest. Up next, we're heading back to the two-dimensional side-scrolling world of Super Mario. And we're going to look at how the Mario Maker game can help us improve what we do in our classrooms in this week's Boss Battle. All right, 8-Bit Warriors. This week, I'm heading back to the console world and taking some lessons that I've learned from Super Mario Maker. So, nerd confession, a year or two ago, I got really caught up in watching these YouTube videos of players playing Super Mario Maker levels. And basically what Super Mario Maker is, it's a Mario game where you can create your own levels. And so I got caught up watching all these because it was really interesting to watch these user-created levels and all that. So fast forward, I got a Nintendo Switch last year and I got the newest one, Super Mario Maker 2, for Christmas. And I've been playing it for the last month or so. And as I was playing it, I started noticing some things that connect to a lot of ideas that I look at implementing in my class. And so I started putting together these different lessons that I've learned from playing this video game, Super Mario Maker 2. And if it's a little too nerdy for you, sorry, but I can't help but notice some of these things. My mind is always just going and paying attention for things that I can use in class. So I wanted to share some of the ideas that I've learned. Some of them are not new. They're things that we've known for a long time, and some of them are just different ways of utilizing things in class. So here we go. So first of all, the Mario games in general are designed in, I think, kind of a unique way. If you look at the way each game essentially is created, you've got different worlds, and then within those worlds you have multiple levels. And then each level is really short. In terms of a video game, most levels in a Mario game you can complete within a couple of minutes. And so right off the bat, I looked at that idea of how we can kind of organize our curriculum. We have units in our curriculum, which would be the equivalent of the worlds in Mario, but then what about the different little levels? And I think one of the things that has become useful to me is utilizing time to our benefit in the sense of not taking longer than necessary to do things. It would be really easy to create an assignment that would take 20 minutes to do, when instead maybe you could shorten it to 5 or 10 minutes. And so one of the things that I do is I look for shorter, quicker ways of assessing skills. And I think one of the things that comes to mind when I think of that was when I took math classes growing up in school. And, we'd always have the homework or whatever where we'd have to do, 20 problems. And I understand that, you have to do a certain amount to show that you've got grasp of the skill. But do we sometimes end up going a little overboard with how much we ask students to do? I know I've done the same thing in my English class. When we would do grammar things or something like that, you'd give them 10 or 15 sentences to correct or whatever. Stop and think, could they show this skill in a shorter, quicker kind of way? Or even beyond that, can you spread that practice out in order to do shorter, more frequent kinds of checks? And so maybe I do want students to revise 15 sentences, but instead of having them do it in a big 10, 15, 20-minute chunk, maybe I break it down and give them 2 or 3 sentences over the course of 3 or 4 weeks to show that they learn that skill. And so it's not just looking at, do they know it right then and there in the moment, but is it more of a long-term kind of thing? Now, on to the Mario Maker game itself. So when you play the game, there are 2 modes. There's the story mode, and then there's the course mode. So I'm going to talk about the story mode first of all. That's the kind of main one-player mode that's just available when you first get on. And then the course mode is the kind of online version of stuff. So a couple of things about the story mode. So when you start story mode, you're set up with this kind of narrative. Princess Peach's castle has been destroyed, and you have to collect, a bunch of coins to help rebuild the castle. And so essentially what you do is you play through a bunch of levels. There's 100 of them total. And as you go through each level, you collect coins and use that to help rebuild the castle. It's simple, it's basic, but it contains this kind of narrative that keeps things flowing and moving. And, sometimes I think why don't we add just a little bit of a fun narrative to go along with the things that we're doing in class? And it doesn't have to be some kind of Pulitzer Prize winning story. Just think of ways that you can maybe frame things in a narrative kind of sense, just to add a little bit more of that kind of a little bit of fun engagement. And so, like one of the things I'm doing right now in class, whenever I give my students some kind of assessment type of assignment, I'm just calling it a mini boss, because video games is the theme that I'm using this 9 weeks. And so I give I tell my students, they're doing a mini boss today. So you gotta defeat whoever. And I might throw a little picture up on the screen of a little boss from a video game. And again, it's stupid, it's goofy, but it just adds a little bit more atmosphere into my class rather than just saying, hey, you're going to take a quiz today. Now, the other thing that I noticed about the story mode in Mario Maker is just the progression of the levels. So, as with, most other games, the first few levels are really easy, and then they progressively get more and more difficult. But the interesting thing is the way that the different levels are set up, because there's a variety of skills that you need for the different types of levels. So you've got things like wall jumps and triple jumps and all this kind of stuff. And so particularly in the earlier levels, you're set up with these different levels that essentially require you to master a certain technique in the game in order to beat that level. Then as you progress further up into the levels, they get progressively harder, but they also start to combine these skills together for greater challenges. And this is nothing new. This is things that we've learned in education for years, where we scaffold. We build some of the basic foundations, and then we help students learn how to combine those things together to take on greater challenges and move to bigger and better things. But one of the things that I kind of took note of, and I think it's difficult, especially for me and maybe others that teach in the higher grades, middle and high school, is that sometimes we forget some of those basic foundational skills. We approach our class under the assumption that even, all of our students should know some of these basic concepts. And I think sometimes we need to set up some of those ways to review or help students redevelop some of those skills that we think they should have. And then we take it and build it to bigger and better things. Because if they haven't mastered those foundational skills, that's really going to make them struggle as they move forward. Now, story mode is great and all, but where this game really becomes a fun game is in the course mode. And basically what course mode is, it's the online part of the game where you can go and you can access other levels that other players have created. And so there's a variety of different types of ways that you can play it. They've got some different game modes in there, but essentially what you're doing is you're playing through user created levels to see if you can beat them is really the goal of the whole thing. And it's really interesting, especially when I'm playing that looking from an educational perspective, how this can really, really apply to what we do in our classroom. So one of the things, again, that kind of stands out is that players get to create their own level. In previous iterations of the game, Super Mario 2, 3, all the way up through until they created this game, Mario Maker, it's all of these pre-created levels that you play through. And essentially, once you beat the game, that's about it. But with this course mode, the game essentially never ends. There are always new levels to play. There's always just new challenges to encounter. So it's really interesting in that sense. So one, players get to create their own stages, and how do we translate that into our classroom? It's pretty easy, We don't limit students to just answering questions or completing activities that we create. we know that if we get them to create their own stuff, it helps them internalize some of these skills a whole lot more. And so I think it's really essential that we let students create their own problems, their own scenarios, their own work for the things that we do in class. And it sounds simple, but it's something that I'll admit, like, I forget to do a lot when I'm planning stuff out in class. I always feel like I have to create everything. I have to put it all together. I have to come up with questions for them to answer. But then turning it around and having them create the questions to test for skill knowledge makes them internalize those rules, those ideas, and all of that. And then having to justify maybe why they created the question the way that they did, having them do some reflection on it and all that. So don't neglect the importance of having your players create their own levels. And then kind of piggybacking on that idea, the idea that you get to play other levels, why not let students, take each other's quizzes or whatever? Maybe for an assessment, rather than you creating the test, you have students create a couple of questions, and then you put it all together, and then they take their own quiz or their own test, and think about how they might have a little bit more buy-in into that, and you double check and you make sure that the questions that they're creating work, and then you just put it all together and then give it to them. The interesting thing about the game is that, you don't get to just create a level and upload it. You have to actually play through the level yourself, and you have to be able to beat it. So, it prevents players from creating these impossible to beat levels. There's always the assurance that this can be beaten. And you can do the same thing with questions. You double check to make sure that they're appropriate questions, that they are answerable types of questions. And then the last point that I drew from this really is kind of the biggest lesson that I've learned from the game. And it's the fact that these player created levels are often so much more challenging than the original ones. I played through the story mode of the game. It's 100 levels, and I beat the story mode in a couple of days, to be honest. But there are levels in the course mode that I can play for hours and hours and still not get all the way through. And so the players are taking these elements of the game, and then they are just creating these incredibly complex, just incredibly challenging levels that take this game and making it so much more enjoyable, because the challenge is the fun of the game. They have what are termed these Kaizo levels, and essentially what the Kaizo levels are kind of trial and error types of levels. They're levels that you would not be able to just automatically beat the first time you play through it. You have to figure out how to get past this one part, and once you get past that other part, you probably die. But as you go through it, you learn, and the first part gets easier and easier, and then you're still trying to figure out how to get past the second part. And so it's a trial and error. You try things, it doesn't work, you try something else until you find out and figure out how to do it, and then all of a sudden it gets a little bit easier. Before long, after you have gotten through that level, it's really tested your skill, and it's really helped you learn how to utilize some of those individual skills a lot better. But even beyond that, it allows for so much creativity. The idea of Kaizo levels in Mario 2 is to take some of the items and some of the elements that are a part of the game, and then you're having to use them in a way that was not originally intended. And so there is that creativity aspect of it where they're taking something like a spring in the game, and normally you might pick it up, drop it somewhere, and jump off of it, but they have what they call spring jumps, where you're having to drop it in midair and then jump off of it, and that's something that was never originally intended by the game, and yet these players are coming up with these unique ways to use these items. translate that over into our classroom. What can we do with that kind of stuff? Sometimes when we step away and just let students be creative with the elements that we give them, they come up with so much more creative, complex, difficult content that we might give them to begin with. I know a lot of times when I've given my students things and said, it has to include these certain things because that's the skill and the content and the standards that we're learning and I'm teaching. Those are the requirements, but you can do kind of whatever you want with it. And a lot of times, a lot of students will just take it and they will run with it. And what they end up coming up with in the end is infinitely more interesting, more creative, more just well done than I would have expected if I had just told them, do this, then this, then this, then this. And so giving them those building blocks, showing them how they work, those are the skills. Those are the standards that we teach. But then give them those creative outlets to express what they know in a way that allows them to be a lot more free and independent with what they're doing. It's sometimes a difficult thing to do, to let go of, but it's really fun to watch what they can do with all of that. So to really sum up a lot of the stuff that this game kind of teaches that can be used in the classroom is almost taking what we do in class and kind of flipping it. Instead of the teacher being the creator of the content and the products, the students become the creator of it, and giving them some of that freedom. So hopefully that gives you some really good ideas of things that you can do in class, which I think can take a little bit of the load off of our shoulders as well. It can alleviate some of that stress and that heaviness that happens when we feel like we have to create, and then students are just do. So hopefully that helps you level up a little bit of what you're doing in your class and has given you some good ideas, which is what I want to hear next, because next up is the 8-Bit Crew Members Board. All right, crew members, this is where you get to be a part of the show. You give me your feedback and I can read some of this stuff on next week's episode. What I really would like to know this week from you guys is, what is an idea that you have of something that you typically put your time and effort into creating that you could turn around and let students create in order to show you what they know? So do me a favor, post your responses up on Twitter. You can use the hashtag 8BitCrew, that is the number 8-bit crew, or you can tag me at Comic Socks, or if you have longer ideas, you can post them in the comments on the show notes page at 8bitinstructor.com. I'd love to hear some of your ideas of things that you can do a little bit differently, and that always helps me get ideas of things that I could use in my own classroom as well. So make sure you post those, and I can read some on next week's episode. Well, that will just about wrap up this episode. Hey, you don't want to miss next week's episode. You don't want to miss any episode, but next week I got a special guest. I've got Tony Vincent himself coming on, and he's going to talk a little bit about visual communication and how we can utilize that more in our classrooms. So make sure to check that episode out next week. Make sure to connect with me online. You can follow me on Twitter at Comic Socks, or you can check out my website, 8bitinstructor.com. And of course, make sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app in order to get all the new episodes as they come out. I hope you guys are doing good. I hope you are hanging in there and staying strong. Just know that what you do matters. And until next week, may your swords stay sharp and your shields hold strong. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and check out the 8-Bit Instructor YouTube channel for EdTech tips and tutorials, as well as other content on my website, 8bitinstructor.com. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ComicSocks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. See you next week. Consumption of useful